The courtroom was thick with silence, an oppressive stillness that made it feel as though time had stopped. Every person in the room had their eyes fixed on the boy who had just spoken, the weight of his words settling like an unseen force upon them all. "I didn't do it, but I know who did." 12-year-old Nathan Parker stood at the witness stand, his hands gripping the wooden edges so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His voice had been soft but firm, sending ripples of shock through the courtroom. His mother, Rachel Parker, a dedicated nurse who had raised him alone since his father's passing, sucked in a sharp breath, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrest of her chair. She hadn't expected him to speak, not after all these weeks of stubborn silence. Across the room, the accused, Darren Cole, a local man with a troubled history, sat frozen at the defense table. His lawyer, Mr. Lancaster, momentarily lost his grip on his pen, sending it clattering to the desk. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Miriam Gaines, stopped mid-note, her brow furrowing as she studied the boy. Even Judge Robert Whitmore, a stern, no-nonsense man, leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene before him. The tension was unbearable. Then, with a loud bang, the judge brought down his gavel. "Court will be in recess for 15 minutes, Judge Whitmore announced. Whispers immediately filled the room as people tried to process Nathan's words. He had held his silence for weeks, refusing to talk to anyone. Not his mother, not his lawyer, not the police. And now suddenly he had spoken, and his statement had the power to turn the case on its head. As the courtroom emptied, Rachel rushed to Nathan's side, kneeling in front of him. "Nathan," she whispered urgently, her hands on his shoulders. "What do you mean? Who are you talking about?" But the boy only looked down, his lips pressing into a thin line. He wasn't ready to say more. 3 months earlier, Brookdale was a quiet suburban town, the kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. At least that's what people thought. Nathan was walking home from school as he did every day. The golden hues of autumn leaves crunched beneath his sneakers as he took his usual shortcut through the park. The air was crisp, and the world smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. That was when he saw them. 2 men were arguing near the old fountain. Their voices were low, but the tension was unmistakable. Nathan slowed his steps, not wanting to be seen but too curious to turn away. Then something shattered like glass breaking. One of the men, a broad-shouldered figure with a jagged scar along his jaw, held a small shiny object in his hand. The other man stumbled back, raising his hands defensively. "I told you to stay out of this," the man with the knife snarled. Nathan's heart pounded. He didn't understand exactly what was happening, but he knew one thing: it wasn't good. Instinct screamed at him to get away. As he turned to leave, his foot landed on a dry twig, snapping it in half. The sound cracked through the stillness, like a gunshot. "Who's there?" one of the men shouted. Fear jolted through Nathan's veins. Without thinking, he ran, his feet pounding against the pavement, his backpack slamming against his back with every desperate step. He didn't stop until he reached his house, his hands fumbling as he locked the door behind him. For the next few days, he tried to convince himself that he had imagined the worst. But when the news broke that a man had been found unconscious near the park, severely beaten, Nathan knew the truth. He had seen something, and now someone was hurt because of it. At first, Nathan tried to push the memory away, but it gnawed at him, a constant weight pressing against his chest. Finally, he told Eric Miller, his best friend since 2nd grade. They sat in Eric's garage after school, The door cracked open to let in the autumn breeze. "So, you saw something?" Eric asked, his freckled face scrunched in concern. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, but I didn't think it was this serious." Eric frowned. "Dude, you have to tell someone." "What if they don't believe me?" Nathan muttered. "What if those guys come after me?" Eric was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe you don't have to tell them everything, just enough to help." Nathan wasn't convinced, but the next day the police showed up at his school. 2 officers entered the principal's office. Nathan's stomach twisted. Were they here because of him? Had someone seen him at the park? When he got home, his mother wasn't there. She was working a late shift. He sighed, tossing his backpack onto the couch. Then came the knock at the door. Nathan's pulse spiked. He hesitated before opening it. Standing on the porch was Officer Grant, a kind-eyed man in his late 40s. Alongside his partner, Officer Blake, a no-nonsense woman with a clipped tone. "Nathan Parker?" Officer Grant asked. Nathan nodded, gripping the door frame. "We'd like to ask you a few questions," Officer Blake said. The questions were simple at first. Had he seen anything unusual? Did he know the injured man? Nathan stuck to vague answers, but they knew he was holding back. A week later, everything unraveled. Someone leaked Nathan's name. Whispers spread at school. Strangers started showing up at his house. Reporters, neighbors, even people he'd never met. His mother was furious. Not at him, but at the situation. She demanded answers from the police, but they had none. Then came the threats. A brick through the window, a note tied around it, scrawled in messy handwriting. "Stay quiet." Nathan's hands shook as he read it. He knew then that this wasn't just a random incident. Someone was making sure he stayed silent. So he did. For weeks he didn't speak. Not to his mom. Not to Eric. Not to the police. He refused to testify. He kept everything locked inside. Until today. Until the moment in court when he realized that an innocent man was about to take the fall for something he hadn't done. So he swore. Judge Whitmore called the courtroom back into session. The gavel banged, silencing the murmurs. "Nathan Parker," he said, his voice firm, "you made a serious statement before recess. I will ask you again, who are you saying committed this crime?" Nathan hesitated. He could feel his mother's gaze, the stares of every person in the room. Then he turned his head, his eyes landing on a figure in the back, the person he never wanted to accuse, the one he had tried to protect, his history teacher. The weight of the truth pressed down on him. "I know who did it," Nathan said, his voice trembling, "and he's sitting right there." Gasps filled the room. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Who, Nathan?" Nathan took a shaky breath, his hands clenched into fists. "It was Mr. Thompson." A stunned silence followed. The prosecutor froze. Mr. Lancaster, the defense attorney, dropped his pen. Even Darren Cole, the accused, turned to look at Nathan with wide eyes. At the back of the courtroom, Miss Thompson, Nathan's history teacher, the same man who had lectured him about honesty and integrity, sat completely still. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The storm Nathan had been trying to outrun had finally caught up with him, and he had just changed everything. The truth unfolds. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom as Nathan Parker's words echoed through the tense air. "It was Mr. Thompson." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly escalating into a wave of gasps and hushed conversation. Rachel Parker, Nathan's mother, clutched the armrest of her chair, her breath catching in her throat. The man her son had just accused, David Thompson, his history teacher, sat at the back of the room, his expression eerily unreadable. Judge Robert Whitmore raised his gavel, bringing order back to the courtroom. "Quiet," he commanded, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. "Mr. Parker, do you understand the gravity of your accusation?" Nathan swallowed hard, his 12-year-old body stiff with nerves. "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Thompson, a well-respected teacher with years of service in Brookdale, slowly stood. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but his knuckles turned white as he gripped the back of the bench in front of him. "This is absurd," Thompson said, shaking his head. "The boy is mistaken." Judge Whitmore studied him carefully before turning back to Nathan. "Mr. Parker, I'm going to need you to clarify your statement. What exactly did you see?" Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the witness stand. "I was walking home through the park that day," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I saw two men arguing by the fountain. One of them pulled out a knife. The other man tried to back away, but then the guy with the knife lunged at him." His breath hitched as he forced himself to continue. "I ran. I didn't see everything, but when I watched the news later, I recognized the man who got hurt. He was the same guy from the park." He turned toward Mr. Thompson, his voice trembling. "And the man with the knife was here." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Rachel covered her mouth in shock. The prosecutor, Miriam Gaines, turned to the judge. "Your Honor, given the nature of this testimony, I request that Mr. Thompson be taken in for questioning immediately." Mr. Thompson raised his hands in mock surrender. "This is insane. The boy is confused. I was nowhere near that park." But Detective Grant, who had been sitting near the prosecution, stood slowly. His sharp eyes locked onto Thompson. "Funny," he said, pulling out a notepad, "because security footage shows a man matching your description entering the park around the time of the attack." Thompson's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Coincidence. I live near the park. But you never mentioned that during our investigation," Grant countered. "Why leave that detail out?" Thompson clenched his fists. "I didn't think it mattered." Judge Whitmore sighed, rubbing his temples. "Enough, Mr. Thompson, given the circumstances, I'm ordering that you be held for further questioning. Officers, escort him out." Two uniformed officers moved forward, their hands hovering near their cuffs. Mr. Thompson let out a low chuckle. "This is a joke," he muttered, shaking his head. "This whole thing is ridiculous." But as he turned toward Nathan, his eyes hardened. Nathan shivered under the weight of that gaze. It was different now, colder. A second later, the officers led him out of the courtroom, awed and danger. Nathan sat in his mother's car after the hearing, his body feeling like it had been drained of all energy. His mother sat beside him, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "I don't understand," Rachel whispered. "Why would Mr. Thompson do something like this?" Nathan shook his head. "I don't know." Rachel exhaled sharply, then turned to him. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought, if I stayed quiet it would go away, but it didn't." Rachel reached over and gently took his hand. "I'm proud of you for telling the truth." Nathan wanted to believe her, but a nagging doubt gnawed at his gut. Had he really done the right thing? As they pulled into their driveway, a chill ran down his spine. A black car was parked across the street. Nathan recognized it instantly. It was the same car that had been following him. His breath caught in his throat. Rachel noticed his sudden stiffness. "Nathan, what's wrong?" He forced himself to look away. "Nothing." But deep down he knew that was a lie. Awed, Thompson's eyes. Then the sound of tires screeching outside jolted him up. He rushed to the window, his heart pounding. The black car was idling just outside their house. A dark figure stepped out. Nathan ducked instinctively, peering through the curtain. The figure walked up their driveway, pausing at their porch. He reached into his pocket and slipped something under the doormat. Then he turned and got back into the car. The engine rumbled. The car sped off into the night. Nathan barely remembered getting to his feet as he stumbled out of his room. His mother was still awake, reading in the living room. "What's wrong?" she asked as he rushed to the front door. Nathan yanked it open. There, tucked beneath the doormat, was an envelope. His fingers trembled as he picked it up and ripped it open. Inside was a single note. "Stay silent. You don't know the full story." Nathan's stomach twisted into knots. Rachel took the note from him, her face paling. "Nathan." He turned to her, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I don't think this is over." "Oh." His expression was unreadable as he pushed forward a manila folder. "We looked into Mr. Thompson," Grant said. "We found something interesting." Nathan's breath hitched. "What?" Grant opened the folder, revealing a photo. Nathan's eyes widened. It was Thompson standing next to another man. The man from the park, the one who had been attacked. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. "That's him. That's the guy who got hurt." Grant nodded. "His name is Greg Foster." Turns out Foster and Thompson had a business deal that went bad, a deal involving stolen money. Nathan felt like he couldn't breathe. "So, Mr. Thompson tried to kill him." Grant leaned back. "That's what it looks like." Nathan swallowed hard. "But if Mr. Thompson is in custody, why am I still getting threats?" Grant's expression darkened. "That's the part that worries me." He closed the folder. "I think there's someone else involved. Someone who doesn't want the truth getting out." Nathan clenched his fists. "Then what do we do?" Grant studied him carefully. "We make sure you stay safe. But we also need to find out who's behind this before they try to silence you for good." Nathan's stomach turned. He had thought the nightmare was over, but now he realized it was just beginning. The deeper truth. Nathan Parker sat stiffly in the police station, his mind spinning. The photo on the table in front of him showed Mr. Thompson and Greg Foster, the man who had been attacked in the park. The revelation had shaken him to his core. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. Detective Grant nodded, tapping the folder. "We've confirmed it. Miss Thompson and Greg Foster were involved in a financial scheme. Embezzlement, to be exact. Foster was supposed to handle laundering the stolen money. But something went wrong. We believe Foster tried to cut Thompson out of the deal, and that's what led to the confrontation in the park." Nathan swallowed hard. "So Mr. Thompson tried to kill him?" "Possibly," Grant said. "But here's where it gets complicated. Someone else is still out there. You received that threatening note after Thompson was taken in. That means there's another player in this game." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Who?" "That's what we need to find out." Rachel, Nathan's mother, leaned forward, her face lined with worry. "Detective, my son is in danger. How do we protect him from whoever is behind this?" Grant exhaled, rubbing his chin. "We'll increase patrols around your house, but that might not be enough. Whoever left that note isn't just trying to scare Nathan. They're trying to keep something buried. And that means we need to dig deeper." Nathan clenched his fist. He had hoped telling the truth in court would end this nightmare. Instead, it felt like he had only stirred up a hornet's nest. A new suspect. Later that evening, Nathan sat in his room staring at his phone. His best friend, Jake, had been texting him non-stop. "Jake. Dude, are you okay? Jake. I saw what happened in court on the news. This is crazy. Jake. Call me." Nathan hesitated before finally typing, "Nathan, can't talk now. It's not over." Almost immediately Jake replied, "Jake, what do you mean?" Nathan didn't answer. He wasn't even sure how to put everything into words. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his bedroom door. His mom peeked inside. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. "Can I come in?" Nathan nodded, and Rachel stepped inside, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I know this is a lot," she said, "but I need you to tell me the truth. Are you scared?" Nathan hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, a little." Rachel reached for his hand. "I am too, but we're gonna get through this together, okay?" Nathan nodded, but deep down something still gnawed at him. Who was really behind this? And how far would they go to keep him silent? Four. Another warning. The next morning, Nathan walked to school with his hood up, trying to avoid attention. But as soon as he stepped into the building, he felt the weight of stares and whispers around him. "That's the kid from the trial," someone murmured. "Did you hear? He accused Mr. Thompson." Nathan clenched his jaw and kept walking. When he got to his locker, Jake was already there waiting for him. "Dude, what's going on?" Jake asked, eyes wide. "The whole school is talking about you." Nathan sighed. "I don't know. It's a mess." Jake hesitated before pulling something out of his backpack. "Someone told me to give this to you." Nathan's breath caught when he saw it. Another envelope. His hands trembled as he ripped it open. "You should have stayed quiet. It's too late now." Nathan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Jake frowned. "Dude, who is doing this?" Nathan crumpled the note. "I don't know, but I have to find out. I have to find out. I have to find out. A dangerous investigation." After school, Nathan made a decision. He needed to find Greg Foster, the man who had been attacked. Maybe he knew who else was involved. Jake insisted on coming with him, despite Nathan's protests. "You're not doing this alone," Jake said firmly. Using an old news article, they found out Foster had been released from the hospital, but had refused to speak to the press. "We need to figure out where he lives," Jake said. Nathan pulled out his phone and searched for Foster's name in public records. After a few minutes, he found an address. "There," Nathan said. "Let's go." Jake hesitated. "Dude, this could be dangerous." "I know," Nathan said, "but if I don't do this, I'll never be safe." This to face with the truth. The boys took a bus across town, their nerves on edge. Foster's house was a small, run-down place in a quiet neighborhood. Nathan hesitated before knocking on the door. Nothing. He knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open. Greg Foster stood there, looking tired and wary. His eyes darted around as if he expected trouble. "What do you want?" he asked. Nathan took a deep breath. "I saw what happened in the park. I know Mr. Thompson was involved, but someone else is still after me. I think you know who." Foster stiffened. "I don't know anything." Nathan's stomach clenched. "Please, I need to know who I'm dealing with." Foster sighed, rubbing his face. Then he muttered, "You have no idea what you've stepped into, kid." Nathan's heart pounded. "Tell me." Foster hesitated, then whispered, "It wasn't just Thompson. There's someone bigger behind this, a man named Martin Kain." Nathan exchanged a glance with Jake. "Who is he?" Foster's eyes darkened. "He runs everything in this town, the money, the corruption. He's the reason this whole mess started. And if he knows you're asking questions..." He trailed off, his expression grim. Nathan swallowed hard. "Then what?" Foster stared at him. "Then you're already dead." Fart. Before he could ask more questions, the sound of tires screeching outside made all three of them freeze. Foster's face paled. "They found us." Nathan ran to the window. A black SUV had pulled up across the street. Two men in dark suits stepped out. Jake grabbed Nathan's arm. "We need to go now." Foster looked at them. "Out the back door." "Hurry." Nathan and Jake rushed through the house, Foster close behind. They burst into the backyard just as the front door slammed open. "Go," Foster urged. Nathan and Jake ran into the alley behind the house, their hearts pounding. Behind them, they heard shouting. Foster's voice, then a gunshot. Nathan skidded to a stop, his stomach twisting. "No." Jake grabbed his arm. "We can't go back." Tears burned in Nathan's eyes, but he knew Jake was right. They had no choice. They ran. Thought. The last warning. Nathan and Jake finally stopped in an abandoned lot, gasping for breath. "We need to tell Detective Grant," Jake said. Nathan nodded. His whole body was trembling. "Yeah." But as he pulled out his phone, it buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A deep voice spoke. "You should have listened, kid." Nathan's blood ran cold. "Now you've really made yourself a problem." The call ended. Nathan stared at his phone, his hands shaking. Jake looked at him. "Who was that?" Nathan's voice barely came out. "Martin Kain." Jake paled. "Dude, we're in serious trouble." Nathan clenched his fists. No more running. No more hiding. It was time to end. The deeper truth. Nathan Parker sat stiffly in the police station, his mind spinning. The photo on the table in front of him showed Mr. Thompson and Greg Foster, the man who had been attacked in the park. The revelation had shaken him to his core. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. Detective Grant nodded, tapping the folder. "We've confirmed it. Mr. Thompson and Greg Foster were involved in a financial scheme. Embezzlement, to be exact. Foster was supposed to handle laundering the stolen money, but something went wrong. We believe Foster tried to cut Thompson out of the deal, and that's what led to the confrontation in the park." Nathan swallowed hard. "So Mr. Thompson tried to kill him?" "Possibly," Grant said. "But here's where it gets complicated. Someone else is still out there. You received that threatening note after Thompson was taken in. That means there's another player in this game." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Who?" "That's what we need to find out." Rachel, Nathan's mother, leaned forward, her face lined with worry. "Detective, my son is in danger. How do we protect him from whoever is behind this?" Grant exhaled, rubbing his chin. "We'll increase patrols around your house, but that might not be enough. Whoever left that note isn't just trying to scare Nathan. They're trying to keep something buried. And that means we need to dig deeper." Nathan clenched his fists. He had hoped telling the truth in court would end this nightmare. Instead, it felt like he had only stirred up a hornet's nest. His best friend Jake had been texting him non-stop. "Jake, dude, are you okay? Jake, I saw what happened in court on the news. This is crazy. Jake, call me." Nathan hesitated before finally typing, "Nathan, can't talk now. It's not over." Almost immediately Jake replied. "Jake, what do you mean?" Nathan didn't answer. He wasn't even sure how to put everything into words. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his bedroom door. His mom peeked inside. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. "Can I come in?" Nathan nodded, and Rachel stepped inside, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I know this is a lot," she said, "but I need you to tell me the truth. Are you scared?" Nathan hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, a little." Rachel reached for his hand. I am too, but we're going to get through this together, okay? Nathan nodded, but deep down something still gnawed at him. Who was really behind this? And how far would they go to keep him silent? Ugh. Another warning. The next morning, Nathan walked to school with his hood up, trying to avoid attention, but as soon as he stepped into the building, he felt the weight of stares and whispers around him. That's the kid from the trial, someone murmured. Did you hear? He accused Mr. Thompson. Nathan clenched his jaw and kept walking. When he got to his locker, Jake was already there waiting for him. Dude, what's going on? Jake asked, eyes wide. The whole school is talking about you. Nathan sighed. I don't know, okay? It's a mess. Jake hesitated before pulling something out of his backpack. Someone told me to give this to you. Nathan's breath caught when he saw it. Another envelope. His hands trembled as he ripped it open. You should have stayed quiet. It's too late now. Nathan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Jake frowned. Dude, who is doing this? Nathan crumpled the note. I don't know, but I have to find out. Or, he needed to find Greg Foster, the man who had been attacked. Maybe he knew who else was involved. Jake insisted on coming with him, despite Nathan's protests. You're not doing this alone, Jake said firmly. Using an old news article, they found out Foster had been released from the hospital, but had refused to speak to the press. We need to figure out where he lives, Jake said. Nathan pulled out his phone and searched for Foster's name in public records. After a few minutes, he found an address. There, Nathan said. Let's go. Jake hesitated. Dude, this could be dangerous. I know, Nathan said. But if I don't do this, I'll never be safe. I'll never be safe. All safe. Face to face with the truth. The boys took a bus across town, their nerves on edge. Foster's house was a small rundown place in a quiet neighborhood. Nathan hesitated before knocking on the door. Nothing. He knocked again. Finally the door creaked open. Greg Foster stood there looking tired and wary. His eyes darted around as if he expected trouble. What do you want? He asked. Nathan took a deep breath. I saw what happened in the park. I know Mr. Thompson was involved, but someone else is still after me. I think you know who. Foster stiffened. I don't know anything. Nathan's stomach clenched. Please, I need to know who I'm dealing with. Foster sighed, rubbing his face. Then he muttered, You have no idea what you've stepped into, kid. Nathan's heart pounded. Tell me. Foster hesitated, then whispered, It wasn't just Thompson. There's someone bigger behind this. A man named Martin Kain. Nathan exchanged a glance with Jake. Who is he? Foster's eyes darkened. He runs everything in this town. The money, the corruption. He's the reason this whole mess started. And if he knows you're asking questions. He trailed off, his expression grim. Nathan swallowed hard. Then what? Foster stared at him. Then you're already dead. Son worried to run. Nathan's mind reeled. Martin Kain, a name he had never heard before, yet it sent a chill down his spine. Before he could ask more questions, the sound of tires screeching outside made all three of them freeze. Foster's face paled. They found us. Nathan ran to the window. A black SUV had pulled up across the street. Two men in dark suits stepped out. Jake grabbed Nathan's arm. We need to go now. Foster looked at them. Out the back door. Hurry. Nathan and Jake rushed through the house. Foster close behind. They burst into the backyard just as the front door slammed open. Go, Foster urged. Nathan and Jake ran into the alley behind the house, their hearts pounding. Behind them, they heard shouting. Foster's voice. Then a gunshot. Nathan skidded to a stop, his stomach twisting. "No." Jake grabbed his arm. "We can't go back." Tears burned in Nathan's eyes, but he knew Jake was right. They had no choice. They ran. The last warning. Nathan and Jake finally stopped in an abandoned lot, gasping for breath. "We need to tell Detective Grant," Jake said. Nathan nodded. His whole body was trembling. "Yeah." But as he pulled out his phone, it buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A deep voice spoke. "You should have listened, kid." Nathan's blood ran cold. "Now you've really made yourself a problem." The call ended. Nathan stared at his phone, his hands shaking. Jake looked at him. "Who was that?" Nathan's voice barely came out. "Martin Kain." Jake paled. "Dude, we're in serious trouble." Nathan clenched his fists. No more running. No more hiding. It was time to end this. The final stand. Nathan Parker had never felt more trapped. The name Martin Kain echoed in his head like a death sentence. He and Jake had barely escaped from Greg Foster's house after seeing him gunned down, a brutal warning from Kain's men. Now they had nowhere to run, and worse, they had just received a call from the man himself. "You should have listened, kid. Now you've really made yourself a problem." Nathan's heart pounded. His fingers trembled around his phone as the call went dead. Jake grabbed his arm. "Dude, we need to get out of here." Nathan swallowed hard. "We can't just keep running." Jake's face was pale. "Do you understand who we're up against? We just watched Foster get killed. We could be next." Nathan knew Jake was right, but something inside him refused to back down. If they ran, Kain would never stop. The only way to end this was to expose the truth. "We have to talk to Detective Grant," Nathan said firmly, "before Kain finds us again." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we need to be careful." The two of them took off into the night, heading toward the only person who could help. Nowhere is safe. They made their way to a nearby gas station, keeping to the shadows. Nathan's phone battery was low, but he managed to call Detective Grant. "Where are you?" Grant's voice was sharp with urgency. "Eastern gas station." Nathan said quickly, "Kain's guys found us. Foster is dead. We need help." There was a pause. Then Grant cursed under his breath. "Stay put. I'm on my way." Nathan and Jake huddled behind the station, watching the street. Every headlight made Nathan flinch. Every passing car felt like a potential threat. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Nathan's blood turned to ice. "Jake," he whispered. Jake turned, saw the SUV, and his face went pale. Oh no! The passenger door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out. Nathan recognized him immediately, one of the men from Foster's house. The man scanned the area, then locked eyes with Nathan. "There they are," he shouted. Nathan grabbed Jake's arm. "Run!" The two boys bolted, sprinting down the alley behind the station as footsteps thundered behind them. Nathan's lungs burned as he ran, adrenaline surging through his veins. Jake was right beside him, his breath ragged. "They're catching up," Jake yelled. Nathan veered left, cutting through a fenced lot. "We need to lose them." They jumped over a chain-link fence, nearly slipping on the wet pavement. The men were still right behind them, closing in. Then a loud siren filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed across the street. Nathan turned to see Detective Grant's car skid to a stop. Grant jumped out, gun raised. Freeze! The men stopped in their tracks, their faces flashing with panic. Within seconds, 2 more police cars screeched onto the scene, cutting off the SUV. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. The men had no choice. They raised their hands in surrender. Nathan and Jake collapsed against a wall, gasping for air. Grant holstered his gun and strode toward them. "You okay?" Nathan nodded weakly. "Barely." Grant turned to the officers. "Take them in for questioning. I want them talking by sunrise." One of the officers nodded. "Yes, sir." Nathan watched the men being cuffed, but he knew it wasn't over yet. Kain wasn't the kind of man to let his empire fall so easily. "Grant," Nathan said urgently. "Kain's still out there. He's not gonna stop." Grant's jaw clenched. "I know." He turned to the officers. "Get these kids somewhere safe. And put a team on Martin Kain." So, he singing again. Jason sat in a dimly lit safe house, surrounded by plain walls and a single lamp. Grant had insisted on keeping him and Jake under police protection until they could take Kain down. Hours passed. Then a knock at the door. Grant entered, his face grim. "We got him." Nathan's heart pounded. "Kain?" Grant nodded. "We raided his office an hour ago. Found enough evidence to bury him. Money laundering, fraud, bribery, he's done." Nathan's shoulders sagged with relief. "So it's over?" Grant hesitated. "Not quite." Nathan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Grant exhaled. "Kain isn't talking. He's denying everything. He's claiming you made the whole thing up." Nathan's chest tightened. "So what do we do?" Grant leaned in. "You have one last chance to end this for good. But it means facing Kain in court." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. He had already stood in one courtroom, facing down his fears. Could he do it again? He thought of Foster's lifeless body. The notes, the car chases, the way Kain had called him, taunting him. Nathan took a deep breath. "I'll do it." All reporters, police officers, even some of Nathan's classmates filled the gallery. At the front of the room, Martin Kain sat in a tailored suit, looking perfectly calm. But his eyes were cold and calculating, locked onto Nathan. Nathan felt a chill but stood tall. The prosecutor called him to the stand. As Nathan took his seat, Kain's lawyer smirked. "Nathan, you've been through a lot, haven't you?" Nathan ignored the sarcasm. "Yeah, and you're just a kid, right? How do we know you didn't just misunderstand what you saw?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Because I know exactly what I saw." The lawyer leaned in. "Or maybe you're making this up for attention." Nathan's heart pounded, but he forced himself to speak. "If I wanted attention, I wouldn't have spent weeks terrified for my life. I wouldn't have watched someone get killed. And I sure wouldn't be sitting here right now, looking the man who tried to have me silenced in the eye." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Kain's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Objection." But the judge raised a hand. "Overrule. Let the boy speak." Nathan stared Kain down. "You threatened me," Nathan said, his voice strong. "You had your men follow me, attack me. You killed Greg Foster because he knew too much. But you made one mistake." Kain arched an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" Nathan's expression hardened. "You thought I'd stay quiet." Silence. Then the prosecutor slammed a stack of files onto the table. "Your Honor, we have evidence proving Kain ordered multiple crimes, including the murder of Greg Foster. We request immediate conviction." Kain's face finally cracked. The judge adjusted her glasses. "I believe we've heard enough." She turned to the bailiff. take him away. So, turn to the bailiff. Take him away. So, dude, we actually did it. Nathan exhaled. Yeah. Jake grinned. So what now? Nathan thought about it, about everything they had been through. We move on. Nathan said finally. We live our lives, and we don't let fear control us. His mother stepped outside, smiling as she handed them lemonade. For bravery, she said softly. Nathan smiled, feeling something he hadn't in weeks. Peace. For the first time, the nightmare was truly over, and he had survived. The unfinished battle. Nathan Parker had thought it was over. Martin Kain was arrested. The evidence was overwhelming. The court case was a success. He was finally behind bars. The headlines had said it all. Crime kingpin. Martin Kain sentenced to life without parole. But deep down, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had spent weeks running, hiding and fearing for his life. Even now, with Kain behind bars, there were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. And then, the letter came. It arrived at his doorstep late one evening. An unmarked envelope slid under the door. His mother, Rebecca, found it first. Nathan, she called, her voice laced with concern. This was outside. Nathan took the letter, his stomach twisting. There was no return address, no stamp. Someone had delivered it by hand. He opened it cautiously, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The message was short, but it hit like a bullet. You think it's over? You only took out one piece. The rest are still watching. And we don't forget. Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. Jake, who was sitting on the couch, frowned. Dude, what's wrong? Nathan handed him the letter. As Jake read, his face paled. Oh crap. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice sharp with worry. Nathan, who sent this? Nathan swallowed hard. He knew exactly what this meant. Martin Kain wasn't the end. There were more people involved. People who were still out there, watching, waiting. And they weren't done with him yet. The ghosts of Kain's empire. Nathan and Jake met up with Detective Grant the next morning. Grant took one look at the letter and cursed under his breath. This isn't good, he muttered. We knew Kain had a network. We just didn't know how deep it ran. Nathan clenched his fists. So he wasn't the top guy. Grant exhaled. He was powerful, but he answered to someone higher up. Someone who stayed in the shadows. Jake groaned. Great. So we basically just pissed off a whole crime syndicate. Grant shot him a grim look. That about sums it up. Nathan felt his stomach churn. He had barely survived Kain. If there were more people out there, how could he possibly stand a chance? Grant leaned forward. Listen, kid. You've already been through hell. If you want, we can put you and your mom in protective custody. Nathan shook his head. No. Running won't solve this. We have to stop them. Grant studied him for a long moment. You're braver than most cops I know, Parker. Nathan met his gaze. Then help me. Nathan kept looking over his shoulder. Jake was paranoid. His mom barely let him leave the house. Then the second letter came. Nice try, kid. Thought you could get rid of us. We're closer than you think. We see everything. Check your back. Nathan's heart pounded as he read it. Check your back. He turned slowly to look out the window. Then his blood ran cold. A black car was parked down the street. Nathan stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. Jake followed his gaze and swore. Dude, they're here. Nathan grabbed his phone and dialed Grant. We're being watched, he said quickly. Black car down the street. Stay inside, Grant ordered. I'm on my way. Nathan's heart hammered as he watched the car. Then the passenger door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He stood still for a moment, then tilted his head toward the house, as if he knew Nathan was watching. Then he climbed back into the car, and they drove away. Nathan exhaled shakily. Jake looked at him. They're messing with you, dude. They're trying to scare you. Nathan clenched his fists. It's working. Poor. The hunt for Ram. Detective Grant was furious. They're testing you, he said. Seeing how much you'll take before you break. Nathan gritted his teeth. Seeing how much you'll take before you break. Nathan gritted his teeth. I won't break. Grant nodded. Then let's go hunting. Using surveillance footage, they tracked the black car to a warehouse near the docks, a known hideout for Kain's associates. Who's running things now? Jake asked. Grant's expression darkened. A guy named Marcus Lane, Kain's right-hand man. Nathan felt a chill. He's most likely, Grant said. And he's twice as ruthless as Kain. Jake groaned. Oh, fantastic. Grant turned serious. Listen, I don't want you involved in this. If Lane finds out you're onto him, I'm already a target. Nathan cut in. I'm seeing this through, Grant sighed. I figured you'd say that. Poor. Confronting the enemy. The night was dark as they arrived at the warehouse. Grant had backup waiting down the street. But Nathan and Jake went inside first. Jake whispered, "This is insane." Nathan ignored him. He had to know the truth. They crept through the shadows, avoiding the guards. Then they saw him. Marcus Lane stood in the center of the warehouse, talking to three men in suits. Nathan's stomach twisted. They weren't just criminals. They were cops. Jake inhaled sharply. Oh man, this is bad. Nathan grabbed his phone and started recording. Lane smirked at the officers. The kid caused a lot of trouble for us. Kain got sloppy. That's why he's in prison. One of the officers shrugged. So what's the plan? Lane's smile widened. We finish what Kain started. Nathan felt pure fear race down his spine. They weren't just watching. They were planning to kill him. Poor. Nathan elbowed him hard. But it was too late. Boss. The guard yelled. We got company. Lane's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Nathan. Well, Lane said, smiling. Look who's here. Nathan and Jake tried to run, but more guards appeared, blocking the exits. Jake cursed. This is bad, man. Lane walked toward them, his footsteps slow and deliberate. You should have stayed quiet, kid, he said. Nathan's heart pounded. Too late for that. Lane smirked. Shame. I was hoping you'd be smarter. He nodded at one of his men. Kill them. Nathan braced for the worst. Crash. The doors burst open as Detective Grant and his team stormed the warehouse. Freeze. Hands in the air. Gunfire erupted. Nathan and Jake dove behind crates as chaos exploded around them. Guards fell one by one as police took control. Lane tried to run, but Grant tackled him to the ground. You're done, Grant growled. Lane struggled. You think this ends with me? Grant punched him hard, knocking him out cold. I do now. Oh no. Lane and his men were arrested. The corrupt cops were exposed. Nathan stood outside the warehouse, breathing in the cold night air. Jake clapped him on the shoulder. Dude, we survived. Nathan let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, we did. Grant walked over. You did good, Parker. Nathan nodded. Is it really over this time? Grant smirked. Yeah, kid, it's over. Nathan looked up at the sky. For the first time in months, he finally felt free. On a final reckoning, Nathan Parker thought he could finally breathe. Marcus Lane was arrested. His corrupt police allies were exposed. The case was closed, but something still felt off. Nathan sat in his room, staring at the ceiling. It had been a week since the raid on the warehouse, a week since he had stood face to face with the men who wanted him dead. So why couldn't he shake this feeling that it wasn't over? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Loose ends always get tied up. You should know that by now, Parker. Nathan's stomach dropped. He scrambled to call Detective Grant, his hands shaking. The line rang, and then voicemail. Nathan's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. Jake read the message and swore. "This isn't possible," Jake said. "Lane's in jail. His guys are behind bars." Nathan shook his head. "Not all of them." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathan exhaled sharply. "The cops that were working with Kain and Lane, not all of them were caught." Jake's eyes widened. "You think?" Nathan nodded. "I think there's someone else. Someone even higher up." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do we do?" Nathan clenched his fists. "We find them, before they find us." An unfinished case. They broke into Detective Grant's office that night. Nathan hated the idea, but they had no choice. The precinct was quiet. Nathan held his breath as he picked the lock. Click. They slipped inside. Jake booted up Grant's computer. "What exactly are we looking for?" Nathan scanned the room. Anything Grant was working on before he disappeared. Jake clicked through folders. "Dude, you might want to see this." Nathan peered over his shoulder. A file labeled The Black Book was open. Inside were names, locations, and evidence tied to the criminal network, including corrupt cops and politicians. Jake whistled. Grant was about to blow this whole thing open. Nathan's stomach twisted. And now he's missing. They had their answer. This wasn't over. A deadly game. Nathan and Jake decided to meet Grant's informant. Her name was Sophia Vance, an investigative journalist who had been working with Grant. They found her in a small diner on the edge of town. Sophia's eyes were wary as she sipped her coffee. "You're Parker?" Nathan nodded. She slid a USB drive across the table. "Grant gave me this in case something happened to him." Nathan's heart pounded as he plugged it into Jake's laptop. Videos, photos, names, and then a recording of Grant's last phone call. Nathan hit play. Grant's voice was urgent. "I have everything. Lane wasn't the last piece. The real head. He's in the system. We have to move fast before static." Then another voice. Low, calm. "You should have stayed out of this, detective." A single gunshot. Silence. Nathan felt sick. Jake whispered. "Dude, they killed him." Nathan swallowed hard. "Who was he talking about?" Sophia leaned forward. "There's one name on that drive that stands out." Nathan looked at the screen. Chief Elliot Mercer. Nathan's hands shook. The chief of police was behind everything. Exposing the truth. Nathan knew what he had to do. They had evidence, but they needed a confession. They had to confront Mercer himself. Jake stared at him. "You're insane." Nathan set his jaw. "It's the only way." Sophia sighed. "If we do this, we need a plan." Nathan nodded. "We make him think we don't have proof. Make him slip up." Sophia's lips curled into a smirk. "I like the way you think, kid." "And me?" Sophia's lips curled into a smirk. "I like the way you think, kid." Mercer, face to face with a monster. They met Mercer at a private club downtown. The place reeked of power and corruption. Mercer sat at a round table swirling whiskey in a glass. He smirked as Nathan, Jake, and Sophia approached. "Parker," Mercer said smoothly. "Brave of you to come." Nathan's pulse raced. "You killed Grant," Nathan said. Mercer chuckled. "That's a dangerous accusation." Nathan leaned forward. "I don't think you're worried about danger. You own the system, right?" Mercer's smirk widened. "Now you're catching on." Sophia crossed her arms. "Why are you still after Nathan?" Mercer sighed. "It's not personal, but the boy knows too much." Nathan's jaw clenched. "And you're scared." Mercer's expression darkened. "You think this ends with me? There's a whole empire above me, Parker." Nathan's heart pounded. He needed one more push. He pulled out the USB drive. "Maybe," Nathan said. "But this says otherwise." Mercer's face changed. For the first time he looked afraid. Nathan smirked. "And this is already with the press." Mercer stood suddenly, knocking his glass over. "You little..." The doors burst open. FBI agents flooded the room. Sophia smiled. "Smile, Mercer. You're on camera." Mercer lunged, but agents grabbed him. "You can't stop this," Mercer growled as they dragged him away. Nathan exhaled shakily. "It's over," Sophia whispered. Jake grinned. "We actually did it." Nathan nodded. Then he looked at Mercer, being hauled off in cuffs. "But I think it's just beginning." Then, Nathan Parker, the teen who took down a criminal empire. Nathan stood outside his house staring at the sky. It was really over. Jake clapped him on the back. "You just took down the biggest criminal in town. What now?" Nathan smirked. "Maybe I'll take a vacation." Jake laughed. "You've earned it." Nathan exhaled, his heart finally light. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. The final truth. Nathan Parker had thought it was over. Chief Mercer was arrested. His corrupt officers were exposed. The news ran stories about the teenager who took down the city's biggest criminal empire. But Nathan didn't feel safe. Something still wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. And then the phone call came. A blocked number. Nathan hesitated before answering. A voice, low and calm, spoke. "You think you've won, kid? You have no idea what you've started." The line went dead. Nathan's stomach dropped. Who was this? If Mercer was in prison, then who was still out there? Though Jake was in the garage, eyes glued to his laptop. "You look like hell," Jake muttered. Nathan slammed the door shut. "Someone just called me." Jake frowned. "Who?" Nathan shook his head. "I don't know. But they knew about Mercer. They said I started something." Jake's face darkened. "Dude, I've been digging through the files from Grant's drive." Nathan's pulse quickened. "And..." Jake turned the laptop screen toward him. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. A name. David Calloway. Nathan's blood ran cold. Calloway was a billionaire developer. He funded police campaigns. He owned half the city. Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. "You're telling me Calloway was behind Mercer?" Jake nodded grimly. Nathan clenched his fists. They had taken down the face of the corruption. But the real power was still out there. And now, Calloway knew who Nathan was. And that meant Nathan was in danger. Zoom. Bemudred. Nathan sat with Sophia Vance in a dimly lit cafe. She tapped her fingers on the table. "You're telling me Calloway was above Mercer?" Nathan nodded. Sophia exhaled. "That explains a lot. Calloway's been untouchable for years." Nathan leaned in. "We have evidence. We just need something concrete." something that ties him to the network. Sophia frowned. That won't be easy. Jake chimed in. There's got to be someone who can talk. Sophia sighed. Calloway's smart. He never leaves a trail. Nathan clenched his jaw. Then we make one. Sophia studied him. You have a plan. Nathan exhaled. We bait him out. Sophia studied him. You have a plan. Nathan exhaled. We bait him out. A bold statement to the press. We stopped Mercer. But the real mastermind, he's still out there. And I'm not stopping until he's behind bars. The news exploded. Nathan's name was everywhere again. Calloway saw it, and Nathan knew he would react. That night it happened. A black SUV pulled up outside Nathan's house. Two men in suits stepped out. Nathan's heart pounded as he opened the door. One man, tall with steel-gray eyes, spoke. Mr. Calloway would like to have a word. Nathan hesitated. This was it. He nodded and stepped inside the car. Face to face with a monster, Nathan was taken to a penthouse office overlooking the city. David Calloway sat behind a mahogany desk swirling a glass of whiskey. David Calloway sat behind a mahogany desk swirling a glass of whiskey. He smiled. You've made quite the mess, Mr. Parker. Nathan kept his voice steady. The mess was already there. I just exposed it. Calloway chuckled. That's cute. But let's be clear. You have no idea what you're up against. Nathan clenched his fists. I have enough. Calloway leaned forward. You think Mercer was powerful? You're playing in my world now, boy. Nathan's skin crawled. Calloway's calmness was terrifying. Nathan knew he had to act now, so he pulled out his phone. Yeah, Nathan said, his voice loud. You getting all this? Calloway's smirk vanished. A voice came through the speaker. Sophia. Loud and clear, Parker. Nathan grinned. He had been recording everything, and Sophia was broadcasting it live. Calloway's face twisted in fury. You little. Before he could finish, the door burst open. FBI agents stormed in. Calloway's face went pale. Nathan stepped back as the agents grabbed Calloway's arms. The lead agent spoke. David Calloway, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and racketeering. Nathan's chest heaved. It had worked. They had taken him down. This for Billionaire David Calloway arrested in criminal conspiracy. Teen whistleblower brings down corrupt empire. Nathan sat on the hood of Jake's car, watching the sunrise. Jake shook his head. Dude, you just took down a billionaire. Nathan chuckled. Yeah. Sophia leaned against the car. You realize, right? This doesn't stop here. Calloway's network was huge. Nathan nodded. But for the first time, he felt free. He smiled. Then we keep fighting, because some truths were worth the risk. The price of truth. Nathan Parker had thought it was over. Again, Calloway was behind bars. The city was celebrating. His name was in headlines again. Teen whistleblower exposes corrupt empire. But Sophia was right. It wasn't over. Not even close. And Nathan learned that the hard way, when the first bullet shattered his bedroom window. Nowhere is safe. Nathan hit the ground as glass sprayed across his room. His heart pounded. Another pop. The sound of a silencer. Whoever was outside wasn't here to scare him. They were here to kill him. Nathan crawled toward his nightstand, grabbing his phone. His hands were shaking as he dialed. Bennett. Nathan gasped when the detective answered. Someone's shooting at my house. Bennett's voice was sharp. Get down. I'm on my way. Nathan's breathing was ragged. He peeked over the bed. A black SUV sped off into the night. They were gone. For now. But the message was loud and clear. Nathan had taken down Calloway. Now someone was coming for him. After this. By the time Bennett arrived, the police were already there. Nathan sat on the couch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His mum, Claire, was pacing in the kitchen, furious and terrified. Bennett crouched in front of Nathan. "Did you see anything?" Nathan nodded. A black SUV. Tinted windows. Bennett sighed. "That narrows it down to half the city." Nathan swallowed hard. "They're not stopping, are they?" Bennett's jaw tightened. Calloway was the head of the snake. But his network, his people, they still have power. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. He'd thought he'd won, but he'd just made himself a bigger target. Target. The warning. The next day, Nathan got a call. Blocked number. He didn't answer. A voicemail came through. He hesitated, then pressed play. A voice, cold, emotionless. "Drop it, Parker. You don't know who you're dealing with. Next time we won't miss." Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. Sophia was right. Calloway's empire wasn't gone. And if Nathan wanted to survive, he had to fight smarter. Target. An unlikely ally. That night, Jake's garage became their war room. Nathan, Jake, Sophia, Detective Bennett, and someone unexpected. Ryan Holt, the ex-enforcer who had worked for Calloway. The same guy who had once told Nathan, "You're in way over your head, kid." Now, Ryan was here to help. Nathan eyed him warily. "Why should we trust you?" Ryan shrugged. "Because I know how these people think. And if you don't listen to me, you'll be dead in a week." Nathan exhaled. "Fine. Then tell me, who's still out there?" Ryan's face darkened. Calloway was rich, but he wasn't the only one funding the operation. Nathan's stomach turned. "There's someone above him." Ryan nodded. "Someone worse." Nathan glanced at Bennett. Bennett's expression was grim. "We need to find out who." Sergey, the new enemy. Jake spent the next 3 days hacking into old financial records, trying to trace Calloway's money. What he found was worse than anything they expected. The real power behind Calloway. Senator William Graves, a United States senator. A man with more influence than Calloway ever had. A man with the power to make people disappear. Jake stared at the screen, his face pale. "Guys, we just pissed off the US government." Nathan's chest tightened. This wasn't just about Calloway anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. A desperate move. Bennett paced the garage, deep in thought. Ryan leaned against the wall. "We can't just take this to the cops. Graves owns half of them." Sophia crossed her arms. "Then what do we do?" Nathan swallowed hard. There was only one option. We go public. Jake stared at him. "You want to expose a sitting senator?" Nathan nodded. "Live. On camera. We drop the files, release the recordings. Everything." Ryan exhaled. "If you do this, there's no going back." Nathan met his gaze. There was never any going back. At Gilvis, the broadcast. The plan was set. They hacked into a national news live stream. Nathan sat in front of the camera. He looked into the lens and told the world the truth. "My name is Nathan Parker. You know me as the kid who exposed David Calloway. What you don't know, Calloway wasn't the mastermind. Senator William Graves has been funding corruption in this city for over a decade, and I have the proof." Jake dumped the files online. Thousands of people started watching. They couldn't shut it down fast enough. It was everywhere, and that's when Nathan's phone buzzed. "Unknown number." Nathan answered. A voice, calm and controlled. "You just made a very big mistake, Nathan." The line went dead. Nathan's hands shook, and then a gunshot rang out. Nathan hit the ground. Someone had fired through the garage window. The war had just begun. The final reckoning. Nathan Parker had always believed in doing the right thing. But doing the right thing came with consequences, and tonight, those consequences had come crashing through the window in the form of a bullet. Race. Under fire. Glass shattered, sending shards across the garage floor. Nathan hit the ground, his ears ringing. Jake dove behind the desk, knocking over the monitors. Sophia screamed. Bennett pulled his gun, shoving Nathan behind the workbench. "Stay down." Another shot rang out, sparking against the metal toolbox. Nathan's heart pounded. They weren't shooting to scare them. They were shooting to kill. Bennett fired back, forcing the gunman outside to retreat momentarily. Jake grabbed a USB drive, shoving it into his pocket. "The files are backed up. Let's go." Nathan's legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to run. They burst through the back door, sprinting down the alley. Engines roared. A black SUV peeled around the corner, its headlights blinding. Nathan skidded to a stop. "They're blocking the street." Bennett grabbed his radio. "Officer down. We need backup at our..." A bullet ripped through his radio. The gunmen were closing in. So, a desperate gamble. Nathan's mind raced. Think. If they ran, they'd get gunned down. If they stayed, they'd get gunned down. But then a car screeched onto the street. A silver sedan. The window rolled down. It was Claire, Nathan's mom. Her face was pale. "Get in." No hesitation. They piled into the car, tires screaming as Claire slammed the gas. Bullets pinged off the trunk, but she didn't stop. Nathan gripped the seat. "How did you?" Claire's knuckles were white on the wheel. "Bennett called me before the shooting started. Told me to get here. Told me you weren't safe." Nathan's throat tightened. Bennett had known. And yet he'd stayed behind, risking his life to make sure they escaped. So, make sure they escaped. Losses and sacrifices. They drove until the city disappeared behind them. "It's a safe house," one of Bennett's. Jake collapsed onto the couch. Sophia buried her face in her hands. Ryan paced the room, his face dark. Nathan. He couldn't breathe. His hands trembled. Everything felt unreal. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Nathan hesitated, then answered, a familiar voice. Calm. Controlled. Senator William Graves. "You didn't listen, Nathan." Nathan's fingers clenched. "You tried to kill us. I tried to solve a problem." Nathan's chest burned. "You killed people. Ruined lives. And you think you're the victim." Graves sighed. "Nathan, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. "I'm not afraid of you. You should be." The line went dead. And Nathan knew Graves was making his next move. So, the last stand. They had one shot, one chance to take Graves down. Jake finished hacking into Graves's encrypted files. Ryan pulled out contacts, old names, old allies willing to turn against Graves. Bennett, bruised but alive, returned with one final play. A meeting. Not just any meeting, a press conference where Graves would be speaking. Live. Televised. A chance to expose him in real time. Nathan stared at the plan. If this goes wrong, We're all dead. Bennett met his gaze. Then we make sure it does. The conference. Hundreds of people. Cameras. Journalists. Graves stood on stage, smiling like a king, addressing his kingdom. Nathan stood in the crowd, his hands shaking. Jake was in position. Ryan was watching the exits. Bennett had officers on standby. The plan. Simple. Drop the files. Show the world the truth. And make sure Graves had no escape. The clock ticked down. Then, Nathan stepped forward and turned on his microphone. The truth. Unleashed. Senator Graves. Graves' smile faltered. The cameras turned. Nathan's voice echoed through the speakers. You funded Calloway. You protected criminals. You ordered the deaths of innocent people. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Graves laughed, shaking his head. This is nonsense. A child's attempt at attention. Nathan raised his phone. Jake's hacked footage played on the giant screen behind the stage. Graves talking with Calloway. Graves ordering a hit. Graves caught in 4K. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Bennett's voice boomed. Senator William Graves, you are under arrest. Graves's mask cracked. The guards moved, but Ryan was faster. One hit. A guard dropped. Another swung. Sophia threw a chair at him. Nathan ducked as officers swarmed the stage. Graves tried to run, but Bennett grabbed his arm, yanking him back. It's over. And for the first time, Nathan saw fear in Graves' eyes. He knew it too. The fallout. The knowledge spread like wildfire. Graves was finished. Nathan was everywhere. His face on the news. His name in headlines. Teen hero takes down corrupt senator. Jake shook his head, scrolling through the articles. Dude, you're famous. Nathan exhaled. I don't care about fame. Sophia nudged him. What do you care about? Nathan looked at the screen. At the truth. At the lives saved. At the difference they made. That it was worth it. A new beginning. The city changed. The corruption weakened. The danger lessened. But Nathan knew the fight for truth never really ends. Bennett offered him a ride home. Ryan disappeared into the city. Sophia and Jake went back to school. And Nathan, he went home. Claire hugged him tighter than ever. And for the first time in months, Nathan slept without fear. Because the fight was over. For now, the power of truth and courage. Life teaches us that standing up for what is right often comes with risks. Yet history has shown us that truth and courage can change the world. Nathan Parker's story is more than just a thrilling tale of exposing corruption. It is a reminder that the fight for justice never truly ends, no matter our age or circumstances. Many of us have lived through times of great societal change. We have seen moments where the truth was buried beneath power and deception. Yet we have also witnessed how ordinary individuals, whether a whistleblower, a journalist, or a simple citizen, can spark change. Nathan, despite his fear and uncertainty, refused to let corruption continue unchecked. He understood that silence enables wrongdoing, and by choosing to speak out, he made a difference. For those of us who have walked through decades of life's challenges, we know how easy it is to feel like the world has grown too complex, too ruthless. But stories like Nathan's remind us that our voice still matters, whether it is standing up for a friend, pushing for fairness in our communities, or guiding the younger generations toward integrity. Our wisdom and experience are powerful tools for change. This story also highlights an important truth about fear. It is often the greatest weapon of the corrupt. Nathan was threatened, pursued, and nearly broken by fear. Yet in the end, fear only has power if we let it silence us. No matter our age, we all face moments where fear tempts us to turn away from difficult truths. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act despite it. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that doing the right thing may not always be easy, but it is always worth it. The path to justice is rarely smooth, and victory is not always immediate. But every time someone stands up for what is right, the world shifts, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that echo for generations. For those of us who have seen the tides of history rise and fall, we know that every battle for truth leaves a lasting impact. And just like Nathan, we all have the power to be part of that change. Whether we are guiding younger generations, speaking out against injustices, or simply choosing honesty in our daily lives, our courage today shapes the future for those who come after us. Because in the end, truth, no matter how long it takes, always wins.